Hello and welcome to this episode of the Driven podcast. My name is Sam Parkinson, and today I'm joined by Byron Mathioudakis, who is a veteran motoring journalist whose work you would have seen from publications such as Cars Guide, the RACWA, Go Auto, and Wheels, just to name a few. He's driven just about everything on four wheels, and he's here today just to help us unpack some of the big EV stories of the week. Byron, thank you very much for joining the Driven podcast.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's such an honor to be on this, particularly with my views on electrification and the direction of future motoring. It so aligns with my values. So
Yeah, well, I'd love to dig into some of those views during this episode. You've been doing this motoring journalism for quite some time. How has the arrival of EVs changed the way that you approach a review compared to a petrol or diesel car?
yeah.
Has it changed?
Oh well, in a word, profoundly. When I started doing this gig in 1997, probably before you were born. Um,
97, did you say?
97, yeah, 1897 it was when I started. I mean, electric vehicles were a pipe dream. I mean, we were still talking about the GM EV1. That's where electric vehicles were in 1997. And so I had a complete internal combustion engine upbringing in terms of, or baptism, as it were, into motoring journalism. And but the whole time, the conversation was about electrification. And I was hearing things like, and we were being told things that we would be having hydrogen powered cars, so fuel cell vehicles by 2010. Certainly battery powered vehicles by mid 2000s. And but the whole time, car makers were just working away doing what they always did, making money from petrol and diesel powered cars. So to answer your question, today it's a completely different story, as you know. I mean, um, you know, there's such a holistic approach to reviewing a car when it's electric, because you're not just talking about a fuel source, you're also talking about an infrastructure, you're talking about a state of mind, and it goes into geopolitical things as well. As you and your listeners and readers know all too well, and this is what you have to take into account. I approach reviewing an electric vehicle using the same um, review parameters and styles as I do a normal car, but in the back of my mind, I also am putting it in in line with what the competition is and what's coming and what's been as well. So basically, it's just creating more work as a motoring journalist in how I review a car. But in the end, consumers don't want to change the way they drive necessarily, or how they approach a vehicle. They just want a vehicle to get them from point A to point B. That is always the bottom line. And so in that way, the reviews are the same and the assessment is the same, but uh, how they do it and what they use, and pertaining to how an EV performs, that's the difference.
Yeah, right. Okay. I mean, how do you think the average Australian perceives EVs now compared to 5, 10, even 15 years ago?
Oh, vastly different. I was one of the first in Australia to have a Nissan Leaf in 2012. Actually, it was 2011. It was before the car was launched, and um, I was at the 2011 Melbourne Motor Show, and they had a competition for one journalist to partake in a Victorian government pre-Nissan Leaf launch event, scheme, where we and it also, I think the Mitsubishi IVF was also included in this. So it was a Mitsubishi and Nissan um, initiative as well, where we drove a car for 6 months before it was launched just to see what it was like. We were basically guinea pigs at a time when there was literally no EV infrastructure. So we're talking late 2011 into 2012, and all very few, very very little EV infrastructure. And it was before Tesla came to Australia as well. Anyway, so in those days, they were just strange objects. People I was driving. I live in inner Melbourne. I was driving into the city, into built up areas, and people just weren't here listening out for EVs. People weren't thinking about EVs, and this is before the EV noise was sound it has to make was standardized as well. So I'm driving around in this silent car, and people were literally just walking in front of me. Um, so, but yeah, but to answer your question, Australians. So that was a dozen years ago. So 12 years ago or 13 years ago, it just didn't factor in people's Australians' radar. I think when the Tesla Model S arrived, that changed everything because that created a an EV that people could aspire to, that they could use with decent amount of range because let's face it, a Nissan Leaf's real world range was 100 kilometers. They only had a 24 kilowatt hour battery.
And where could you charge the Leaf when you were driving it back then?
So there used to be a company called Better Place, which was an international organization. It was an Israeli organization, in fact, that had this big idea of changing the world with battery swapping technology. I'm not sure if you recall that. I'm sure some of the people who are listening may recall it. They were in partnership with this as well.
Right, okay, yeah, I did hear about it. I wasn't aware of it that long ago, but, when into the Neo Firefly who are looking at, using this battery swapping kind
Yeah.
of system.
Yeah, definitely. So that's there's nothing new under the sun, is there, when you think about it? Anyway, they set up a quite a modest, I think it was maybe, it was under 7 kilowatt hour charger at my home here in Brunswick, under my carport. So that's where I would charge the car. But my partner also is a lecturer at Monash University, which is maybe 25 kilometres away in Clayton, and so he would drive the car and have access to a charger there because Monash University have also been very forward in their in them wanting to promote the adoption of better charging networks. So yeah, so that wasn't a problem, and having a 100-kilometer range car was not a problem either. I mean, you, you we charge cars like we charge phones, and that was certainly the mentality that I had to adopt back then when people weren't thinking about EVs, and it worked. I don't think I ever purposely ran out of charge once in that car. I reviewed that long term. It was a 6-month trial. Maybe it was a bit longer. That was when I was working at Wheels, and I that was a long term. Um, we had it in the long term fleet as well, and photographed it, and I would write monthly updates as well. So in the end, it wasn't that hard, and it made me realize that range anxiety is something that kind of is in your head, really.
Mm. I did a drive, recently last month, my family from Darwin to Alice Springs, in like a 7-meter long motorhome far from a Nissan Leaf, but I was thinking, um, where I would charge if I was to try and do that drive with an electric vehicle, and I did see along the way, there was one type of charger. There were these very old and rusty looking, like, CHAdeMO chargers, which looked like they were about 12 or 15 years old, and they did exist at some of these very, rural, pubs, and hotels, but they didn't look like they had been used in some time, so it looks I don't know if that was part of the Better Place. Oh, that well, wouldn't have been because that was a battery swapping thing, but,
Oh no,
the
they were also promoting that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah, very much so. So yeah,
So there was I don't know, it was interesting seeing some almost some fossilized CHAdeMO EV chargers, which, in the outback, but,
which I came across just I had a trip recently, very recently, driving from Adelaide to Melbourne, and I was shocked once I crossed the border back into Victoria, um, the how many CHAdeMO chargers still exist, um, rather than the Type 2 ones. So yeah.
yeah, yeah. So do you think that, like, from your perspective, are there any particular, like, EV brands that are doing a better job than others in convincing, you know, skeptical buyers to consider electric vehicles as their next vehicle?
I think from my perspective, the gold standard has always been Tesla in terms of, having their ecosystem. specifically for their cars. And I know that they've recently licensed that out to other manufacturers, which is a great thing. But that to me has really helped. I think people around the world, but particularly in Australia, um, it helps allay fears and allows the adoption of, I think, EVs for longer journeys. And so, I mean, Tesla being Tesla today, um, I feel that, yeah, they do a good job. I'm so impressed with Hyundai and Kia as well. I mean, the Korean approach to EVs is just that, they is choice, 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 and having the ability to pick up an EV, which a high quality EV with proper EV native engineering in terms of having a skateboard platform and and vehicle to load abilities and all that sort of stuff from the go get for most of their models, or most of their EV specific models, I think helps as well. Um,
Yeah,
mm,
I think I was gonna say from the legacy automakers, perspective, I think those 2 would it be fair to say are doing the best in terms of, trying to make that transition. I mean, a lot of the other big EV players are not necessarily legacy automakers, by Hyundai, Kia, obviously been around for some time.
yeah, it's a shame that Renault and Nissan dropped the ball so much. After having been, obviously global leaders with their respective Leaf and the Zoe, which was an unrelated product, by the way. The Zoe was a smaller car within the same organisation, the Renault Nissan alliance, but it just had it was a different approach, and even that seemed, not to have a uniform approach in two EVs seemed kind of weird. But the Zoe was Europe's best-selling EV during the 2010s up until near the end of that car's life run, and the Leaf, of course, until the Model 3 came, was the
So
best-selling
what do you think
EV.
they've gone wrong? Companies like Renault and Nissan, what's happened?
Oh, I think that's very much an internal management situation. I mean, it's what happened with Carlos Ghosn and his ousting of from the company and eventual kind of escape and into fugitivism. What's the word? Fugitivism. Um, very much reflected an inertia within Nissan and Renault, and I think that's a whole podcast. I think what went wrong with being the number one EV suppliers of the world 10 years ago, even like in 2015, to now really scrambling to catch up. And I mean, obviously the area finally arrived in Australia last month or earlier this month, and hopefully they can claw back
Bit of
because
ground to make up. Speaking of legacy car makers, Toyota is one that's been, accused of dragging their feet a little bit on the EV front. Now your trip to South Australia that you had mentioned just earlier was actually to go pick up a Toyota EV, the BZ4X. So how did that go? How was that process of picking it up?
So the BZ4X, I had some dealings with that car prior to me deciding to buy this car, and that is I was in Tokyo a couple of years ago around the Tokyo Motor Show, the automobility show that they had, where they took us off roading in a BZ4X, and I'm talking the Prado and Land Cruiser and FJ Cruiser development tracks that they have near Toyota City in Japan, and that car, part of the reason why we decided to buy a BZ4X, and I'm gonna say used, not new, is because, it does have some ground clearance, and also an all-wheel drive system that was ably demonstrated when I was with Toyota on a car launch as a guest, as a motoring journalist, that it can do that. Now, my partner is a geologist, and there's a lot of geological stuff going on for his work, so he needs to drive off road, sometimes not off road, but certainly on gravel, and then maybe a few more things. And the fact that this EV can do it was key to us choosing a BZ4X. We didn't actually go. We didn't start we didn't look the process didn't start for us looking out for a BZ4X. It's just that at the moment, we're in this perfect storm at the moment, I think, in Australia, where uh, there are too many new EVs, unsold EVs, that need to be shifted. and that has affected the resale value of new or slightly used or out of lease EVs. And if you're it's such a perfect time to buy an EV, possibly a used EV, and this is what we did. We just we bought this for well below what the projected used price of a BZ4X is, because we haggled and it was a used purchase, a private purchase. And anyway, it was in Adelaide. I live in Melbourne, so I flew to Adelaide and decided to drive back via Robe, because I decided I would kind of see whether it was close enough to the 400 plus kilometer range that that car has.
Yeah, a very good opportunity to give it an early test. That's for sure. Doing the trip from Adelaide to Melbourne. So how did it go?
So, oh gee, that car exceeded my expectations in so many ways. Given it's not a proper skateboard like EV only architecture, it's on the TNGA, a platform that is shared with the RAV4 and pretty much all other modern ICE SUV Toyotas. Anyway, uh, I I, it I certainly it certainly exceeded my range expectations, because I was driving a lot of it was around 100, 110 kilometers an hour on the freeways and the motorways that lead from Adelaide towards Melbourne, and then you peel off to go towards Robe. Um, it was fine. It was fine. Uh, it did show the range indicator, because of the way I was driving, did show that I ran out of range 25 kilometers before my destination, and it was about 10:30 at night. And I thought, okay, here we go. With my experience with a Leaf, if the range indicator dropped down to zero, you had 500 meters to find a place, and I did that. I did that as part of the wheels testing. But this is me by myself at 11 p.m. Trying to get to Roe via Kingston, and it's showing that I had 25 kilometers and I was on zero range. And I couldn't slow down. I had trucks behind me. It was 100 kilometers an hour. I was, I just wanted to get there. It was late, and that car absolutely sailed through. I got to my to the public charger 25 kilometers in, and it did not skip a beat. And then the next day, when I set off via Hamilton to get back to Melbourne, which was like a 350-kilometer drive from where I was, I the same thing happened where the indicator after 300 odd k's, 300, maybe as close as 350, it was showing zero, but I still managed to go in that situation 15 kilometers over, and not a problem. I think that there are, as you know, there are redundancies, or rather, the range is a conservative figure, and you still have some left in the tank. Now, don't take that as gospel, because if but certainly with the BZ4X, it does, and that was a pleasant surprise. And after that, I had absolutely no range anxiety.
Okay. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, but if you're in a Leaf, especially one of the early Leafs, if it's 0, you've not got long left.
You've got literally 500 meters, and I purposely ran it out to for the article. And in those days, the RACV, I call the RACV the NRMA version of here in Melbourne, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I also learned that, because I'd been waiting for the tow truck to come pick up the car, I was sitting on a hot day with aircon on, and I flattened the 12-volt battery, like the regular battery, and when that goes flat, the car won't start anyway. You've got to replace the battery, and that was a whole different thing. So early EVs, I felt like we were very much I was very much part of the pioneers of EV motoring in 2012. So,
Yeah,
uh,
very much so. Cool.
it's so much easier. Like, you know, everywhere I went, there was there was at least a 7 kilowatt hour charging option, in terms of, because I went on I checked, excuse me, I checked the Google Maps, and of course, some of the third party charging apps that I have, like the famous ones, they also show where their charging points are. It was not difficult. I had to plan. but it was not difficult, and it wasn't like I needed calculations, and all that sort of stuff. I just thought, "Well, I'm heading towards here. I have 4 or 5 options, within a 20 or 30-kilometer range of where I plan to go. That's good enough for me, given that I'm driving from Adelaide to Melbourne," and it did not let me down. So, yeah.
Okay. And is this your first EV that you've purchased?
No. After the, uh after the trial Leaf of 2011/2012, um, James fell in love with with a Leaf. So we bought one. We bought a Leaf in 2014, a similar situation to the BZ4X. The Leaf was not a big hit. I think they only brought or sold only a couple of hundred in Australia officially. I know there's been a lot of grey market ones coming from Japan since then. Uh, so we bought one. We got it at a terrific price, and we had that for 3 years, and nothing went wrong with that car. Even with its like, it went down it, Nissan Leafs infamously had this, battery health bar at a right-hand binnacle on the right-hand side of the binnacle, and I think your viewers or readers who have Leaves will know that you dread losing, I think it was a dozen lights. As the battery degraded, a light would go out, and, I only lost 2 lights. I think it was down to 10 or 8 or whatever it was. In that, and I'd sold it with 35,000 kilometers, and by then, well, I think when I sold it in 2019 or 2018, I can't remember when. Anyway, by then, Tesla had arrived. The EQC was emerging. Cars, and the second generation Leaf was looming as well. And I managed to sell it for what I bought it for all those years earlier. So,
Wow, a good investment in the end.
so I'm
Yeah, there's
hoping the
something
same thing happens with the BZ4X, by the way.
hey, yeah, well, we will see. There is something that feels a little bit more dramatic about a light going out rather than like a gauge which kinda, like, gradually declines in length, you know? It's just kind of boom, you know?
Indeed, because you would have that, of course, with your EV experience, right?
Though I don't know if I've got the lights going out, but, as in, like, the way that it tells me how much, battery is left, it basically gives me a number, and that's kind of what I use. I have an Ioniq 5 and yeah, it gives me my range in numbers, and then I kinda look at that, which, by the way, is it's in repairs at the moment, getting its entire battery module replaced. The range dropped suddenly from about 500 kilometers to less than 150. Um,
Wow.
and I'm not quite sure. I don't think we've gone to the bottom of how that happened. But I think we'll find out. But it's all covered by warranty. But I've been without my Ioniq 5 for a few weeks now, so I've driven a range of vehicles in the last few weeks, which have been either through press loans or through courtesy cars. So I had the Ioniq 9, which was a bigger version of the Ioniq 5, basically. I think a little bit less pleasing to the eye from the outside, but I do think the Ioniq 5 is particularly nice to look at
And lovely to drive as well.
and lovely to drive
Yes,
too.
I drove that last year, on the international launch in LA, where it was basically designed, and it's gonna be produced in the US as well, right? And that vehicle certainly impressed me from a refinement and range perspective. And the design, we had the designers there, and they were telling us what their vision was, and, that maybe there was a little bit of Kool-Aid drinking when you listen to them talk so enthusiastically about it. But then I returned to an Kia EV9, and I think that car is just one of the standout vehicles, period, of this decade, and of course, the Ioniq 5.
Yeah, well, I yeah, it's I mean, it's hard to not compare the Ioniq 9 with the EV9 because, it feels like it's sort of the sibling rivalry almost, between Hyundai and Kia. So, I like both cars. We did a review on it, and I felt like the Ioniq 9 was a bit more luxe in some ways, I think, and maybe EV9 a little bit more sort of utilitarian and practical in some ways, at least in the interior cabin. But yeah, pretty similar. I guess it's the same kind of demo, isn't it? So, but both great, both really nice to drive.
But you're right. I mean, the EV9 for me deserves a place in the, New York Design Museum, like, such a stunning piece of automotive design, which elevates it. And for me, aesthetics is for cars has always been such a draw from a professional perspective, and also as a car lover. Um, and I don't let it affect how I review a car. But by golly, when cars are as handsome as an EV9 or an Ioniq 5, because I think they're handsome, they're very handsome cars, it just adds to the experience. And I look at the fussy lines of the BZ4X and I think, "Oh god," it's it's such a fussy looking car, but, you know, it's also it has other virtues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I was so I had the Ioniq 9, and then I was given an i30N, which was the
Oh, you
first time
poor
driving
thing. You
a
poor thing.
souped up hatchback. I was trying to find a spot in Sydney where I could press the launch button. I just couldn't find anywhere I felt comfortable enough to push it, but it certainly made a lot of noise.
I gotta say, and kudos to Hyundai here. The i30N, when that was introduced in 20, I think it was unveiled in 2016 and came out in Australia in 2017. What it did was its critical success and the fact that it showed the world that Hyundai could produce a global hot hatch answer to a Volkswagen Golf GTI or a Peugeot 308 GTI. It was at that like Renault Megane sport level of competence. It allowed for people to go, hang on, if Hyundai and Kia can do that, then when they release their next big thing, we will give them a go. And that I think is part of the Ioniq, the i30N in particular. I think opened, albeit in its own way, opened the door for the Ioniq 5 and the EV6 and the EV9 for people to it shifted perspectives on what those 2 car companies could do or those 2 brands could do. So
Beyond the gets and the
exactly,
amount.
exactly. So kudos to that particular car, and I know it's an internal combustion engine car, and it's a car very much steeped in old school performance values, um, which actually reminds me of answering one of your first questions to me about how you approach reviewing cars. I was recently driving a hot hatch, a Volkswagen Golf GTI, which is still so great. But no Golf GTI automatic, like a dual clutch, Volkswagen Golf GTI, really, when you compare it to even a mildly warm EV hatch, it its place is in the past. And then you drive an Ioniq 5N and you think, "Wow." Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, I mean, I look, I haven't driven an Ioniq 5N yet, but, some of us that have driven have, and just speaking to some other journalists, on some of the press sort of junkets that we've been doing, they seem to have this similar view of the Ioniq 5N, which is, that's quite a vehicle. But even when driving the i30N, I mean, I definitely I understood the appeal for sure. There's something fun about the grunt and the noise, and so I totally got that. Um, but in terms of the torque, maybe I was just maybe having driven the Ioniq 5 as my everyday car, and just the torque you can get from an EV, I guess it made me appreciate a little bit less in the i30N. I wasn't going from my Honda Jazz to the i30N. I'm going from an Ioniq 5, and there are certainly some things which the i30N does, which is fun, which the Ioniq 5 can't. But in terms of just pure acceleration, yeah, it was fine. But my Ioniq 5 can do that too. So
Yeah, yeah, at a in a heartbeat, it can do that. And you know what? Actually, that actually, I'm thinking on the fly here. The Ioniq 5N is the first EV hot hatch that pushes boundaries in that hot hatch genre in a way that is spectacular. Because that thing is it is almost otherworldly in the way that it responds, in the way it grips and handles. It's Scalextrics. It's like a Scalextrics, right? In a way with that instant torque that you said, but magnified, amplified in such a way that a Golf GTI or a Golf R or even my favorite internal combustion hot hatch of all time, which is the current Honda Civic Type R. Oh, love that so much. Um, Even they can't replicate that, and they can't. It's impossible. It's just physics, right? The way an electric vehicle works compared to internal combustion engine. So again, Hyundai pushes boundaries.
Mm. And do you find that, part of the experience in when I was driving the I-30N was like the noise and the grunt, and I think for the first time I understood the appeal. I mean, standing on the side of the road and hearing that car go past and you think, you're not that excited by it. In fact, you're probably quite annoyed by it. But in the car, like, I understood it somewhat. Obviously, the Ioniq 5N makes those synthetic sounds. Does that part of the Ioniq 5N, can they replicate that part of the experience, do you think?
100%. I don't know why people get so annoyed with, replicated sounds in EVs. Because nowadays, most internal combustion engine, like hot hatch noises are also enhanced, through like, even something like a Nissan Patrol Warrior has that kind of flap in the exhaust that comes out the side to give it that sound. Same with a Raptor, right? A Ford Ranger Raptor.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. And you know what? I'm wearing a Tintin T-shirt, which space about the space travel. I'm a huge Tintin fan, and I feel I am someone who, like, loves to live in the future world. Like, I'm a Star Trek, I'm into sci-fi and all that sort of stuff. Kinda does that sound like the Enterprise in warp speed? To me, like, it just does something for me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
also being, look, and I've and but, yes, I know that there's a when the natural exhaust sounds of a well-driven manual hot hatch from yesteryear, that is its own thing, and that I love that, and, it's also it's a sensory experience that also it's much an auditory as well as an audible kind of experience, and you can smell the petrol of a and all that sort of stuff of those, you obviously can't replicate that unless they have some sort of smell-o-vision in a in an EV, but certainly, the fact that you can choose the sounds in an EV, that's fine with me, and I mean, they are like we're talking, stratospherically more competent than a 20-year-old EV in terms of the way they grip the road, the way they brake, the obvious efficiency, and that neck snapping acceleration. I mean, yeah, sub 4 second 0 to 100 times. They do it like the smart hashtag 3 Brabus, which I think I'm not sure if it still is, but in the middle of this year, up to the middle of this year, it was a bang for your buck champion. It was the fastest accelerating car you could buy for the money, 3.7 seconds. You have to spend $120,000 plus on a Mercedes AMG A45 plus blah 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 hatchback to achieve to at least meet that. And this $70,000 smart does it, without you know.
Yeah, they've been trying. Yeah, interesting. Um, Couple of things I want to talk about, but I've just got to take a quick, ad break for those of you who listen to our podcast just for the ads. This is your time. Otherwise, for the rest of you, we'll be back in just a second. And you're back with the Driven Podcast with your host, Sam Parkinson, and our guest for today, Byron Mathioudakis. Um, Byron, we saw each other last week at the launch of Skoda's new large electric SUV, the Enyaq, and we got the chance to drive it, um, for a few hours up to the Hunter and back from Sydney. What were your thoughts on the Enyaq?
What a name. By the way, it is related to, the artist Enya, if you're old enough to remember. I'm a bit of a music head as well.
I do know who Enya is, but I didn't realize they were related.
So, yeah, so Enya is a Gaelic word which I think, pertains it means, I think maybe peace or harmony or something like that. I'm sure, someone will correct us, but anyway, and I think that's what inspired that name. And then they added a Q at the end of it because, Skoda's EV strategy, as you know, is an E and a Q, and stuffing, letters to turn a nonsense word into something that makes sense. So Alrock, Enyaq, what's another one? Epic.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
Kodiak.
yeah. Oh, and Kodiak, but that's internal combustion,
Oh,
so it's got a
is it?
K,
Yes.
so yeah. Um,
Oh, it's got a K. Yeah, well, it's got a Q at the end though, doesn't
it
it?
has got a Q, but yeah, E it's got for an EV, it's gotta be an E at start.
Oh, it's got
How
got a
Germanic is
K.
that?
I didn't know that. They didn't include that in the presentation, but
Yeah.
that's
Did you also know that the face of the, Enyaq facelift was inspired by the Mandalorian mask?
no, but thinking about it that way, it does kind of make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so we like to add value here at your podcast, you know? The Driven likes to inform and entertain at the same time, which I'm not.
This is why you've been such a prominent journalist for the last period of time. You've little bits like that
Little
that I
tidbits, yeah, yeah. Um, look, I am such a fan of this car, mainly because of the value proposition. I At last, we have an affordable, properly EV based, like a skateboard platform MEB vehicle, with very doable range at 410 kilometers, I think is the base of the 60 Select, at $50,990 before on road costs. Pardon me. And decent power, 150 kilowatts, 310 newton meters. It's fine. It's more than fine. The fact that you don't actually need to spend anything else makes it the most relevant EV launch this year, as far as I'm concerned. A family, even if you're not a family, but I mean, if you've got, if you've got a small family and you want an EV, this is a car that you must consider, given its 7-year warranty as well, and the fact that Volkswagen has had a few years to iron out the bugs on that MEB platform, namely the multimedia system, but also other little things. I found it an enjoyable and a very and whether it's an EV or not, it was a hard car to fault, and I was scratching, to find real criticisms of that car. My only thing was I thought that the ride was a little bit firm, and we didn't get to drive it on, city roads. Well, I didn't get to drive it on Melbourne's, quite crappy, urban roads, the urban jungle here, but look, I think it'll be fine anyway. Um, I was very impressed, and
mean, that's yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, sorry.
and you agree, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I think it's a great car. I found with the models that have that adaptive suspension, can't remember the official name that they use at Skoda, but
Yeah, the adaptive dampers that those things come with, yeah,
yeah, I
yeah.
just found that just made it such a comfortable ride. And I found it to be even smoother and nicer than the L-Rock, which I guess makes sense because it's, it's a slightly more premium car, it's slightly bigger. But, yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I think the word I would use most is, like, it felt reassuring in a sense that, it was just trying to do the basics well, and it does do that. And, in my article reviewing the Enyaq and the L-Rock, I kind of ref sort of referenced the way in which it was almost a refreshing take on a trend in EVs where, we're getting a lot of these cars that look like spaceships, and inside they're very different, and I think that's great, and I think we need to have those, and that's kinda what Tesla did initially. Then it was different enough to really, get the attention of people. But I also think we need to have these kind of vehicles like the Enyaq, that are just they're not a big leap from if you're driving any nice SUV and you step into an Enyaq. I just don't think you're going to have any problems adjusting to having an EV. To be honest, particularly in the way you operate it. I just thought it was practical. So sensible, practical. Okay, it's not gonna get you to 0 and 100 in 3.7 seconds, but, do you really need to do that? I mean, especially if you're in Sydney or Melbourne, doing the school drop-offs, is that really that important? So, yeah, I thought it was a really, really nice car, and just, yeah, the pricing, as you said, for it to come down from almost 70K in the first iteration just 12 months ago to 50K 12 months later for the base model. I mean, that's that $20,000 difference in the entry level cost, is pretty remarkable.
100%. I agree. So that model that was released 12 months ago was the higher engine output 85 Sportline in a coupe SUV shape, which to me actually looks a lot like an Audi EV coupe, like the Q4 e-tron, which is a very closely related car. I think my takeaway is that this is a return to Skoda brand values. a car that is substantially or, uh, or pleasingly cheaper than its Volkswagen version, and certainly more so than the Audi version, but also providing, the little touches that you want, like good equipment levels, a sufficient amount of safety, and also everyday usability. I've already touched on the 7-year warranty thing, and I 100% agree with you with the space and the versatility of that thing, and the accessibility. It won't scare off non EV buyers or first time EV buyers. I think the previous Enyaq actually had a nose that was too similar to the ICE version. This new Mandalorian nose, actually, I think, is interesting enough, for people to think, "Oh, hang on, that's not your usual Skoda," but it's packaged, sensibly enough for to appeal to people. My biggest issue with that car, actually, now that I remember, is the fact that it doesn't have, a spare wheel.
Mm. Which is, I think, quite common these days, unfortunately, in particularly EV models.
Yeah. There are, suppliers now that you can buy a spare wheel and a jack, for a few $100s. You just need that if you're driving in rural Australia. My BZ4X doesn't have it's got the dreaded can of goo or the tyre repair kit. Those things, as you know, ruin tyres. You can only use them once, and the cans themselves are a few $100s to replace, and you have to replace the tyre. It becomes a very expensive thing, when in the past you just had a space saver spare, but I'm ranting and raving and going off piece here. So, anyway, back to the
Well,
ENIAC.
I think it's a good point. I mean, like, a spare wheel is gonna be useful potentially at some point, particularly for the more off-road, approach the vehicles, like the BZ. I think, it's if it's supposed to be something that you can use, off the city streets, then for sure. I mean, is there space in the Enyaq? I can't recall to
So that
fit in?
MEB platform, look, I think potentially there would be, like, underneath the floor, but potentially. But I've spoken to manufacturers, and Honda in particular, because I had a bad experience with a hybrid, having a flat and having to leave the car in Apollo Bay because there was no spare tire, and uh, there was, over a public holiday. Anyway, that was a nightmare. And all I needed was a space saver spare wheel would have done the job. It would have got me going, and I had to make my way back. Anyway,
But
uh,
why haven't they done it? Why have they taken that away? Do you what
it's because a spare wheel adds kilos, and that affects range, and that affects efficiency, and and in Europe particularly, where every gram of CO2 emissions counts and people get taxed the higher it is, to have your best possible foot forward with the lowest carbon emitting vehicle is, is paramount, and that reflects in that's the only reason why they do it. I think that, uh, car manufacturers in Australia, or importers rather, because they don't make cars in Australia, of course, anymore, must have a physical spare wheel option, whether it's and they have to have it in such a way that they can Velcro it to the carpet at least, where you can, if you're gonna go on away, you can just pull it out of the shed or your back room and put it in there. But yeah.
I mean, surely they could just do all those tests and the CO2 tests and all that aerodynamics and whatever, and then just have that as had an option for a cheap price, and then, that way it's still easy to get, but it's technically not part of the specs.
Well, yeah, but there are third parties that do provide that. So I think for all your listeners and readers, they must know that if they want a spare wheel, you can go to a third party provider. Just do a search engine search for EV spare wheel, because it's got to come with a jack as well, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they want
So
these Velcro on the back, on the carpet in the back, so they don't move around, which adds, to mitigate flying objects. So
yes, of course, yes, yeah. So, I mean, these are the Aerox and the Enyaq, they're two, I think we can agree, pretty decent vehicles from Skoda, and really sensibly priced, particularly for a European electric
Sam, I
SUV.
think it's the most impressive and, potentially best value Skoda in years. That's how
And do you
far I would
think
go.
is that gonna be how do you think is that gonna be enough to convince people? I mean,
If it doesn't, it would be down to their lack of marketing nous, if anything, or maybe, people might still have, prejudices towards, a Skoda brand that in the '70s and '80s were Iron Curtain, the butt of jokes. On, the older viewers and readers will remember that. But it deserves to be on on any family EV SUV shortlist. I haven't driven the Elrock yet, which, of course, I didn't realize the Elrock is actually an Enyaq with a shorter bum. Yeah.
It felt pretty similar.
Yeah, like, they use the same doors, eh, and the same front structure. So, it is and the same length wheelbase. They're actually the same car, except for it's got more rear legroom, and it's got a larger cargo capacity. Also, they've designed it, I think the styling of those, proportionally, both of those cars are quite handsome, don't you think?
Mm. Yeah, no, I think they look great. So, I mean, it's this new platform on the platform, this new sort of design language that's sort of implemented, and I think it gives it a.
What's it called? Tech
Oh no, you're talking about the tech grill, which is the front, but there's a solid design language, I think is what they
Oh,
call it.
yeah, yeah, it's a marketing thing, yeah, yep. It serves them well, I think.
Yeah. No, I think they look great. So, yeah, I mean, it'll be really interesting to see how the Enyaq and the Elrock will form in Australia because I think, as you said, if vehicles like that offer that much car for dollar, can't get, lift off in the Australian market, then yes, either it's, uh, an issue with Skoda's marketing uh, program, or maybe we have still a lot of work to do in terms of the Australians' approach to EVs because yeah, compare it to some of its ICE competitors, and you know, it's it'd be hard to dismiss.
Yeah, it really is Skoda putting its best foot forward.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and it's something which I thought that it's nice to see. Like I know we talked about Hyundai and Kia before, and how much of a good job they're doing that they're doing, releasing good, really good EVs. I do get the sense particularly with Hyundai, I'm less familiar with Kia, but um, that they are, um, in terms of the pricing, I still think the Ioniq 5 is slightly more than it should be at this point. And they seem to have a slightly less aggressive approach to pricing than what I remember Hyundai doing back in the 2010s when they had the Gets for like 14,000 drive away, and it was like it flooded the streets. There was so many. It was such a well reputed and affordable entry level car, and it feels like they've stepped away a little bit from that approach in terms of reducing the margins, is getting more out there. Seems to me, and obviously I could be wrong, but this is my take, is that they're less willing to cut the margins, even if that means selling less.
Yes, and if I may, break some news here for you,
Please do.
apparently, Hyundai will discontinue the smaller motored Ioniq 5 and put more equipment in the existing one for the MY26 model, so it's gonna be even more expensive, which is great news if you own one in terms of it might actually help with resale value in that, because, to replace an Ioniq 5 now will cost that much more. So I think that they're moving even further away from that, from that Kia model of, and maybe that Skoda model of making things more affordable. And I think they're trying to I think internally they're trying to position Hyundai like Volkswagen versus Skoda's Kia or Kia's Skoda. Does that make sense? Yes, and there's gonna be a demarcation between the two brands.
Where they're trying to set themselves above Kia in terms of the in terms
Yeah,
of.
yeah, very much so. So, and I think that's reflect like, we earlier we were talking about the Ioniq 9 versus the EV9. I felt that the Ioniq 9 did feel more zhuzhy inside, like, I think you said that too, and it felt more of a premium thing, and that's a deliberate thing in order to differentiate the 2, because at the moment, Kia and Hyundai are interchangeable in consumers' eyes, I think, except Kia has a 7-year warranty, which Hyundai's just matched, but they I think Kia has taken the initiative, and certainly in terms of design, they have run away with it.
Yeah.
Ioniq
Okay.
5 accepted, of course, because that's a beautiful car.
Yeah. Well, you can buy mine perhaps for a premium price if I need to.
Well, yeah, there you
I
go.
mean, I really like it, but I just moved to a house with a garage, which I was very excited about parking my EV in, and only to realize once I moved in that the laneway to get into the garage is too small for my Ioniq 5, and I think probably the only car I can think of that I'm going to be able to fit in is maybe the Insta, which is the very small EV from Hyundai. I haven't tried it. I'm going to this weekend. I've got a friend with an Insta who's gonna come over and see if they can fit it into the garage. I can fit I got a, 2003 Honda Jazz
And we've fanboyed about jazzes in the
and whatever. Yeah, I love the Honda Jazz. I'm not getting rid of that. That is a vehicle for the ages, and I hope they resurrect it at some point.
yes, yes. You might be able to fit an EV3, maybe not, I'm not sure.
Maybe I'll have to try it. I did try fit the i30N in there and no dice. So, yeah, it's very tight. Anyway, we'll see. One last thing before you go. We just been covering a little bit around Tesla's new FSD full self-driving system, which they launched. Well, they've unveiled recently in Australia, and
At a bargain price. Not.
and it yes. What is it there? Was it but it's still 10 grand, isn't it, up
It's a little
front?
bit over 10 grand, yeah, upfront.
Or you can do a subscription, I think, isn't it? Or 150 a month or something like that for yeah, so, we had one of our riders, Riz Akhtar, do do a bit of a test drive around with that. I mean, I haven't spoken to him at length with it, but he did write a piece up on the Driven this week, and he's very impressed with how it goes. He was surprised just how good it was uh, at at driving itself around and dealing with all the different sort of things that you need to think about when driving, especially in Sydney roads and in Melbourne roads. I mean, what is your from your perspective, like how big a gap is there between what people think full self-driving means and what it actually delivers?
I think that there's a lot of education and that needs to be communicated here. Um, the bottom line for me is a self-driving car, a full self-driving car, and that's what obviously FSD stands for, um, is perfect until something goes wrong. And in a couple of the reviews that I've seen for the FSDs in Australia, there were a couple of times when the vehicle needed human intervention because it was going to get itself into a situation, right? Um, Albeit minor, going up a one-way street or that sort of thing, or just that sort of thing. We're not talking about a full collision, but I think I'm not a fan. I'm a cyclist. I'm a pedestrian. I live in the inner city. I'm not comfortable with. I'm not 100% comfortable with FSDs anywhere. Um, I attended a Volvo launch some years ago in Sweden, in Stockholm, and they talked about FSDs. And they back then, I'm not sure if it's changed since, but there's no reason why this would have changed. They said that we cannot confidently, or from an insurance perspective, sell an FSD in Australia because Australia is unique in that it's got one particular animal that is absolutely uncontrollable unpredictable in its movement, and that is a kangaroo. They said we cannot. The technology is just not there for us to confidently sell a car knowing that a kangaroo can hop randomly from any direction in front of the car, and then the car, if it doesn't react, there is an impact.
Interesting. I mean, there's a part of me which the cynical side of me says that sounds like someone who's never been to Australia before and has seen the Qantas clips and things that kangaroos jump around everywhere. Of course, in the major cities they don't, but yes, but even places like Canberra, they do.
In Civic, I've almost hit a kangaroo in Civic, not in a Civic, in Civic in Canberra. So
What about rabbits? There's a lot of rabbits in Canberra. I remember.
yes, yes. Also in Robe, by the way, I was avoiding Robe, the rabbits of Robe in my BZ4X, but yeah, I digress. So that, yes. So
So what do you think should be the bar though for FSD? Because obviously, are we? Is it that we need FSD to be pretty much 99%, 99.9% or 100% safe with no margin of error? Because we're obviously comparing it to human error, which, as we know, is happens fairly frequently. So is it that it just needs to be more safe and have a less percentage of incidents than human driving, or does it need to be, if we're going to let the robots do the driving, they need to be perfect?
Sam, I think I'm gonna be controversial here. I think FSD should be made available and people should be able to buy it, but they need to be absolutely alert and 100% um, aware of what's going on at all times in Australia. And because as you know, in the US and in North America, a lot of the research people switch off in FSD cars. They read a book. They they tend to have a nap.
Well, they shouldn't,
Well, they
right? That's the
shouldn't. Yeah, but people will because it is human nature. And just like it's human nature to make errors and and lapses of judgment and concentration, which is where FSD doesn't make those as a whole. Look, I'm for it, but it should be there on always simply as a backstop. And or you need just to be like if they can have technology where they can read your retinas and know that you are alert and not under the influence of alcohol or drugs or anything like that, you don't have fatigue and that you are of sound driving ability, then by all means have it on and stay alert.
Well, having driven some of the recent vehicles, especially the EV9, I found it was very attentive to my eye movement and,
Maybe too much so, right?
maybe too much so, actually. I find it a little bit annoying. I don't know if you could tell if how big my pupils were or anything like that, if I did look away at, even just looking at the center console, it said, "Excuse me," back I was back on the road. So that wouldn't be unfeasible, to have that
Yeah.
as a
It
backstop.
we I don't think we should be as lenient as they are in North America. I think that we need to have all these caveats, and absolutely people need to know that they will be culpable or liable for anything that goes wrong, in an FSD car if they stray from that. And I'm not saying there should be video surveillance, but there will be technology that we should be able that could show that people, like, had their eyes off the road prior to an incident, that sort of thing.
That would be, yeah, very useful in I can imagine the complex sort of, the cases that are gonna happen where you've got, someone who was driving in an FSD car, they claimed the vehicle was responsible even though they were attentive. The manufacturer would say, "No, it was, it was the driver that should have been paying attention." Having something that can actually provide, a bit of evidence as to what was happening, like, what the attentiveness was of the driver at the time would seem to me need to be an essential part of the whole insurance process. Otherwise, it's gonna be a very messy and very complex and
The insurance price, and what will that do in terms of premiums just generally? Like, if we have to pay extra for insurance just to cover those, let's face it, those middle class and upper income earning people that can afford a $10,000 FSD upgrade in their Teslas, that's quite annoying if that's the
you'd
outcome.
think though that the rate of incidents, statistically should be, lower than non-FSD driving. So, from that perspective, you would like to think that the premiums shouldn't go up, but, who knows?
Yeah, but that's assuming that insurance companies are benevolent and
Well, they're not in it for the profit, Byron.
it's not at all.
It's yeah. We did one of our journalists who does drive a Tesla, Tim Eden. He bought the FSD package when he bought his Model 3, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And now he finds himself in a position where, the what he bought can't be delivered because he's on an old hardware. He's got hardware 3. This is only available on hardware 4 vehicles. Um, it's not a cheap thing to upgrade the hardware. Elon Musk did, say in his Q4 report, earnings report for Tesla last year that he would be offering, hardware 3 customers who did buy the FSD package, upgrades to hardware 4. But who knows if that will happen? Tim himself is a bit skeptical about that, and if it doesn't happen, rightly so, he's pretty pissed off about it, because he's bought something which really was never delivered. So, do you think that's something that that's likely that they're gonna do these? I don't know how many people bought these FSD packages back then, but
I mean, to be an
yeah.
early adopter of anything, there is a level of risk that involved. But yeah, I mean, you would expect that Elon himself would send a check back plus the difference in dollar value since then in terms of inflation to people who've paid for it and aren't getting it because that's basic Australian consumer law. Um, uh, Something that you've bought something, it hasn't been delivered, and just because the tech has advanced, they should be compensated. I think.
Yeah. And just with the cost, as we said, it's 10,000 upfront, or you can pay a subscription. I think it's about 149 a month or something thereabouts. Do you? I've noticed these subscription things coming in a little bit more into vehicles recently. There's if you want to use Blue Link for Hyundai, for example, there's a subscription cost. There's subscription costs associated now with vehicles, certainly more so than before. Do you think that we're entering uh, like an almost like a software era where the true profit for car manufacturers is actually going to be in the software rather than the hardware?
100%, and BMW do that too a lot. Um, I think that what actually is going on is they're having a go, seeing if they can just make some more money. But from a consumer's perspective, I think that's an area where you can possibly value add to your purchase by haggling for that stuff to be free. So yes, yes, and yes is the answer to your question. think, I think, and I, I think it reflects very well on the brand image that people are forced to spend $130,000 on a vehicle, and then they have to pay a subscription for something that some car makers, others offer for free. It's clearly a money grabbing thing. I think it's just
I mean, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if it drops the upfront cost of the car significantly, then maybe. I mean, the old printer models, that was basically printers became so cheap, it was less than the cartridge. So the upfront cost of a printer very small, but it's the ongoing ink cartridges that where the profit lies.
what a
So
perfect analogy there, Sam. Yeah, that is so true.
yeah, I guess we'll wait and see how these things pan out. But I don't want to keep you any longer. I know you're a busy man, so I just wanted to say thanks for coming on and joining the Driven podcast. It was really really great to chat to you, Byron.
Such fun, and I can't believe an hour's passed at least. It's been great. Thank you.
Hopefully that's the thoughts of the listeners as well. So thanks again, and we must have you back on sometime. Thanks to everyone listening. Thank you to our sponsor, the Australian Electric Vehicle Association, for your support. And we will be back again with another episode of the Driven Podcast in about a fortnight. Until then, take care.